Welcome to the Pat White Show. Many years ago, I was told by a politician who has since passed away that if you get into politics, be prepared because it's a blood sport. I really didn't understand what he was talking about, a blood sport. He said, it is ugly, it is dirty, it is mean, and it is a blood sport. Well, now I'm beginning to think maybe he was right in what he said. Because if you're following the news, and the chances are you don't know what I'm going to tell you, because ABC, NBC, CBS, the legacy networks, they did not report this at all. And today is Sunday, July the 20th. And I watched all the news stories this morning. You know, you get the Meet the Press, the CBS Face the Nation, all the different shows they have. And none of them brought this topic up. But it was a big topic released on Friday. But no one said a word. So I said, okay, let me tune in Fox, see what their Sunday news says. They covered it a little bit, and then ultimately Maria Bartiromo was on, and boy, she covered it a lot because she had Tulsi Gabbard, the head of the, information, the DNI, Director of National Intelligence, where 18 intelligence agencies report to her, and she knows all the secrets. Well, on Friday, Ms. Gabbard, she broke out 100 pages of documents going clear back to 2017. I realize that's a long time ago, but it was when Donald Trump was first elected president back in 2017, much to the surprise of many people in America, and especially to Hillary Clinton's team. She lost. He won. So on December the 8th of 2017, Barack Obama was still in office. And every day the president gets what is known as a briefing, a presidential daily brief. And for every single day, the briefing is said from the intelligence agencies, hey, during the campaign, the Russians had nothing, they couldn't do anything, they couldn't change anything, they weren't involved. Russia had nothing to do with it, every single presidential brief up until that date. Well, on that date, President Obama, who's still in office because it's still December, called the NSC, the National Security Council, for a sensitive meeting. Okay? Sensitive meeting. You get John Brennan, you get James Clapper, you get Comey comes in there. All these people are in this sensitive meeting, National Security Council. And they were getting ready a report to send to President Obama, the presidential daily brief. And after the meeting, the sensitive meeting, Clapper calls up the people over at the who prepare the presidential daily brief and said, I want you to change it. I want you to get rid of that stuff that says that you knew nothing about it, we knew nothing about it, and I want you to change it to say the Russians were involved with this, the Russians did X, Y, and Z, did all this stuff. That happened. So the presidential brief after that said, oh, the Russians were involved. Now, why did it change? What happened? Well, according to the documents Tulsi Gabbard released, in that meeting, it was a decision made to go after Donald Trump in any way, shape, or form they could. Any way, shape, or form. Including saying Russia changed the election. Russia altered it so Hillary didn't win. Russia was the cause. And then if you remember after that, once Donald Trump came into office, he spent 2 years fighting the whole Russian collusion thing. The Mueller report took, 3 years, cost $40 million, found nothing. People were arrested. People had their lives just destroyed, put in jail, all on this narrative that Russia was involved. Russia was the one who got Donald Trump elected. All that went on. And frankly, it destroyed a lot of stuff and essentially ruined the first term of Donald Trump. And all the time he kept going on TV and said, hey, this is not correct. It's wrong. Oh, Trump's lying. It doesn't believe it. We know. Intelligence says it so. What Tulsi Gabbard released on Friday was 100 pages and said, wasn't true. Something changed it. Clapper called in and said, I want it changed. People in the intelligence industry at that time said, what? That's not correct. Well, now some of those same people are coming forth as whistleblowers. And this coming week, They are going to go public and say, yeah, this is what happened. I was there. I saw it. I did this. All this is coming about. And none of the ABC, NBC, CBS networks cover this at all on their Sunday news shows. None of them. Why? Because many of those former people in the entire administration are now working for those networks, are now employing those people. And so they're not going to say anything. Only one network did. You can say, well, Fox, we don't care about them. They're to the right, they're whatever. Tulsi Gabbard is the head of the National Security Agency. She knows all the secrets. She pulled out the paperwork. Here's the paperwork. Here's the notes. Here's all the stuff from the meeting and handwritten notes from that meeting. And she released it. Probably pretty gutsy doing that, you think about it. So, next week, she's going to put out more. But what she said was she has given it to Pam Bondi and the Justice Department and let them see if they want to do a criminal investigation, a criminal charges potentially. But can criminal charges be brought against the president, a former president? Can they be brought against the former head of CIA, the former head of the National Security Agency, the former head of the FBI? Can criminal charges put them in jail? Can they be charged? Well, not in Washington, D.C., folks. Telling you right now, it ain't going to happen in D.C. D.C. protects itself. They don't want anything bad to happen to their people. Could it be charges be filed outside of Washington, D.C.? We shall see what Pam Bondi is able to do. But right now, you know what you know. The networks did not, I repeat, did not cover any of this on Sunday. They knew about it since Friday. One network did. And Tulsi Gabbard went on that network and said, here's the stuff with Maria Bartiromo. You don't believe it? Go onto YouTube, type it in, Maria Bartiromo, watch it for yourself, see it for yourself. Then you decide if you believe that Tulsi Gabbard is lying. I don't think so. She's releasing stuff that probably should have been released. But it goes clear back to the first administration of Donald Trump. Is that old news? And will the president say, I have executive privilege, you can't arrest me? Folks, I don't know the answers to any of those questions. But I'm just telling you, there's the information, and the Democrats, they only want to cover Jeffrey Epstein. They don't want to touch this one in any way, shape, or form. But will they? We'll find out. Start watching the news in this coming week to see what happens. But now you know what's happening, folks. Now you've been briefed. And if you didn't see it on TV, now you know why. Because they don't want you to see it. They don't want you to hear that things are really ugly and people will lie to you so they can't lose their power. That's all this is about. Losing power and doing anything to make sure they don't. And as that former politician told me, politics is a blood sport. And now you're seeing the blood. And that's what's going on. Well, everybody has heard that Stephen Colbert's show, Late Night, has been canceled. No, it really hasn't been canceled. Let me tell you exactly what it was. His contract, Stephen Colbert's contract, was due to expire next May. That's why they're saying his program's going to continue until next May, because his contract runs out then. Now, Paramount is selling the package to Sky Media. And Sky Media is going to be taking over the whole program, the whole network, if you will. And they're looking at the bottom line, saying, here's how much we're paying for this thing, and who's making money and who's not. Well, let's talk about who's making money. Stephen Colbert's staff is 200 people. He's making $20 million a year. Now, the whole package that was put together involving the Late Show was $100 million. They anticipated the revenue, and the revenue used to be $120.1 million. So they're making $20 million. It has fallen back to $70 million. Why? Well, because frankly, the ratings aren't there and things are shifting at night. If you think late night programming is still the way to go from the old days, it ain't, folks. Late night programming is one of the things on television networks that's dying. The average age of someone watching late night TV, 11:30 to 1 o'clock in the morning, 68 years old. It's not the young people you think. The young people are watching apps. They're on like Netflix. They're on Hulu. They're on surfing on YouTube. They're even on Amazon apps. Because that's where they're going at night. That's what's happening to TV. Regular TV, in a way, folks, is dying, whether you like it or not. Now, Colbert, all right, he took over for David Letterman. But remember, Letterman and Leno and Carson, they were back in the old days, and this is really important. They believed in two things on late night. You had to inform and you had to entertain. Carson, Karnak, all the bits that Carson did, he did plenty of bits. Letterman, top 10 lists, crazy pet tricks. Letterman did also the same thing, and same thing for Leno. Leno was funny, informing and entertaining. That's not what Colbert did. Colbert was preaching. Colbert was putting on people on the left. He hated people on the right, hated Republicans, and he made no bones about it. That was his shtick. And you remember the one skit that he did with the hypodermic needles dancing around on the stage saying science is right, get your injections? That was Colbert. People weren't watching him. His ratings were down. And if you want to think about what he was, Colbert's on YouTube. He's got a streaming channel. On that channel, he's got roughly 9.8 million subscribers. Fine, that's a lot of people, right? Well, Jimmy Fallon's got 37.5 million to 9.8. That's telling you. Paramount said, hey, it ain't working. Late night ain't working, and we're going to let the contract that Stephen Colbert has expire next May, and that's exactly what they're doing. And then they're saying we're getting out of late night. Even Bill Maher, for crying out loud, used to be on all the time. Now he's on Friday nights, 10 p.m. And if you're going to get into anything political, take a look at Gutfeld. Gutfeld is leading the pack now. He's number one. He's on at 10 o'clock at night. So the real story is this. They're losing money over at CBS and Paramount. And a perfect example. In 1975, Johnny Carson, a commercial sold to Johnny Carson, was $30,000 for a 30-second spot. Back in 1975. Compared to today, that same $30,000 translates to $179,000 in today's money. And yet, a spot on Colbert's show sells for $29,400. On Fallon, it sells for $48,750. What does that tell you? So for all these people coming out and saying, oh, no, we're losing this, we're losing it. The Constitution in the First Amendment says Congress shall make nothing that gets in the way of free speech. Congress shall not. This is not Congress telling Colbert that he's out of a job. Colbert knew his contract was not being renewed. And yet he's complaining, oh, it's being done. I blame the administration. I blame Trump over all this. Paramount is trying to get rid of their product for Sky Media. And Sky Media is saying, we don't want that dog because that dog is costing us money. $100 million budget, and it's only making $70 million in revenue. Folks, you're upside down. And if you're upside down, when you buy something, you want to get rid of the dead weight and start making a profit because you got to pay back the people that you bought it from, as well as satisfying your investors who are investing in the project in the first place. That's what's happened. Well, you can talk about this all you want. That's perfectly fine. You can make whatever platitudes you want. But the truth of the matter is, younger folk today are abandoning late night and everything is moving to apps. Whatever that app is, whatever it's on cable channel, on streaming is the way things are going, folks. Why do you think all the television networks are setting up streaming situations? The Peacock Network, NBC, every network has their own streaming channels because that's the way they're going, because that's what America's doing. The internet has killed a lot of things, but the internet right now is killing standard television systems because everything is an app. You look on your phone. How many apps do you have on your phone? A ton of them. Well, now that's the way things are going. And I'll tell you what, Colbert is just the first, because I'm telling you, Fallon and Kimmel, they're all destined for the same line. It's happening to all of them. That's why they're already going on to apps on YouTube with their particular streaming shows. Things are moving, folks. Now you understand. If you got a huge budget of $100 million, you're only making $70 million, you are losing $30 million every single year. And that's exactly what's happened in the Colbert situation. And he is not following the rule. Remember I told you the rules in the beginning? Inform and entertain. Colbert is doing neither. He's preaching. You preach, the audience is going to say, sorry, not interested, and you're cutting off half of America that wouldn't have voted for that anyway. Keep in mind, that's how America feels. So if people aren't watching and advertisers aren't buying, you are going to be dust in the wind. And this is exactly what happened to Colbert. And now, keep in mind, it started with him, and it's not over for all the TV networks, because times, they are a-changing. And now the TV networks are beginning to realize it, and they too realize we got to change or we are going to die. Well, probably the biggest talk in Washington, D.C. does not evolve around whether Barack Obama or his staff committed treason involving the election back in 2016. It's not about that, folks. It's actually having to do with Jeffrey Epstein. Jeff Epstein is the talk of Washington, D.C. in more ways than you could possibly think. Now even the Democrats are saying, bring on the evidence, show us the stuff. And it's turned into political football. But some new news to tell you. As you know, the Alan Dershowitz, who was formerly the attorney for Jeffrey Epstein, says that, hey, there's no list. He never saw any list as his attorney. He said, the only thing exists are affidavits. And these are basically claims coming from people who claim that Jeffrey Epstein did X, Y, or Z, whatever it happens to be. And they write out this affidavit saying, I'm swearing that this person did this. Well, those affidavits have been held by a federal judge in a federal court. And one of the ideas was to, well, contact the judge and see if the judge will release the affidavits, which have been kept hidden and under lock and key, and they kept away from everybody to preserve the integrity of the evidence itself. Also, the individual who made the charge, and as well as the chargee, the person being charged. So, just keeping everything fair. So, the people went to the federal judge today and said, Your Honor, would you release the affidavits of people involving Epstein? Because that's the only thing that's left that they can get to. Federal judge said, no, I'm not releasing them. So now you know all those affidavits that contain all the information from people saying Epstein did this to me and with this person or whatever. Judge says, no, I'm not releasing them. So where does that leave us? Well, that leaves us one option left. Jeffrey Epstein's girlfriend, Ghislaine Maxwell. Now, she's been cooling her heels in a federal prison in Tallahassee, Florida for the last 5 years. She was given a 20-year sentence, which frankly was probably the sentence that Epstein would have gotten, but since he offed himself, they gave it to her instead. 20 years for what she did. Well, that's a real interesting call. But she's been sitting in the cooler for the last 5 years. And now she's indicated that she is willing to come before Congress and the public and tell folks what's going on. You have to understand something. If she does this, her attorneys, or attorney, whomever it happens to be, is going to talk to the prosecuting attorneys and say, look, you want the info, here's what we want. You see, in the federal judicial system, you have to understand, not every case goes to trial. 90% of the cases are plea bargain. They work a deal between the prosecution and the defense attorneys. They cut a deal, because if you try to try everybody in the caseload, it overloaded, you wouldn't get anything done. That's the problem. So plea bargains are done all the time. So right now they figure the plea bargain's going to come from her attorney saying, okay, she wants out of jail after 5 years and she wants to be set free. Well, you could probably make that argument that, yeah, because there's been people who've been done worse things and been released earlier. 20 years, yeah, you might say that's a little extensive, but 5 years she's served. Now, if she's willing to come forth and say, here's all the stuff I know, and she knew everything, don't kid yourself. She was the fixer. She was the doer. She set up everything. She got things taken care of. She got everybody, hooked everybody up. She knows everything. And if she decides she's going to, cough up all the information, she's going to hawk up a fur ball for the Senate and the House on everything going on in front of national TV. Well, that may be worth offering her a deal to say, okay, you're out of jail. And will she do it? I don't know. Will she take the deal? I don't know. But will her attorneys try to make that deal? My guess is that's exactly what they're going to do. So, where we stand right now, federal judge says, no, I'm not releasing the Epstein files. And two, his girlfriend, Ms. Maxwell, who's cooling her heels in prison, has now said she wants to come in front of Congress, but only if she gets the right deal from the prosecution. How will it turn out? Anybody's guess, folks. We're about to find out. So hold on to your coffee and pop some popcorn because it's going to be real interesting real soon. Well, the chances are you probably heard about all the information and hoopla that's going on in Washington, D.C. involving Tulsi Gabbard, the DNI, Director of National Intelligence, the keeper of the secrets, dropping information that says, hey, President Obama and his higher staff, we're talking about the Clappers, the Brennans, Comeys, Susan Rice, a number of those folks, got together and tried to alter the presidential election of Donald Trump back in 2016 by saying the Russians had stepped in and altered the election or attempted to alter the election, that Hillary lost. Okay, that's where we are. So last Friday, Tulsi Gabbard dropped the paperwork and said, here's all the paperwork, here's showing exactly what went on. Well, let's just assume that her paperwork's correct. Let's just assume that some whistleblowers come out and say, yes, that's exactly what happened. I was working at the intelligence agency when we were told to change the definition of things, change the results of things, and say that something was going on that wasn't. Okay? Let's assume all that. And I've had people say, oh, man, we can finally get him now. We can finally get him now. Get him for treason. Get him for whatever. So I thought, well, I wonder if they can. Now, everybody remembers that Donald Trump was convicted in a court in New York City. Of course, the crime he was charged with was so outrageous, and every attorney that I've talked to and who understands the law says, there's no way. That's completely, totally off the books. Court of Appeals is going to turn that out, throw it out in a moment. If it ever gets there. Now, the Supreme Court also said that the president is immune from being charged with anything criminal-wise while he's in office doing his duty. Keep those two things in mind a little bit. So I went and take a look up and said, okay, America, what can President Obama be charged with? Brennan, Clapper, Susan Rice, James Comey. What can they actually be charged with? Well, there I looked under what is better known as 18 USC. It's the U.S. Code, Section 18, Section 3282. Now, if you dig down into that, it says that people are immune from being charged after 5 years. That's right. The statute of limitations on virtually all federal crimes, there's a few exceptions, all federal crimes, the statute of limitation is 5 years. Now, what happened? What happened in 2016? So what's that, 9 years ago? So technically, the statute of limitations has run out. You can't charge anybody on that, but there's a couple of exceptions. When you're saying, well, what about treason? Treason! Well, treason doesn't have a statute on it, but the bar is set so high because the founders realized what was going on in England, where they were charging everybody over there who had a political disagreement with a king or whomever with treason. So they set the real high bar. And treason, that's a tough one to prove because you got to show they were going against war of the United States, literally going against the United States, and with an overt act, it says, consists of either levying war against the United States or providing aid and comfort to its enemies. Not sure that you're going to get that one going out. Also, you got proof intent. And finally, you've got to have two witnesses come forward in the court of law saying, yeah, that person did that. All right. Now, that's really for treason. However, there's a few other crimes that maybe, just maybe, that don't have a statute on them. Murder is one of those, doesn't have a statute. Certain sexual offenses, it doesn't have a statute. But fraudulent activities, okay, that may be an area of potential. Fraudulent activities dealing with things like embezzlement, money laundering, securities fraud, fraudulent activities. So, would changing the presidential daily brief and saying the Russians were involved be considered fraudulent activity? I don't know. Because one thing, you got to get a federal jury, a grand jury, to indict someone. And here's the other big thing. Keep in mind that because the crime was committed in Washington, D.C., at the White House, presumably, that, well, that's where they say, okay, then we've got to try this crime there in Washington, D.C. And folks, I'm going to tell you flat out, you ain't going to get a jury to convict any Democrat in Washington, D.C. It ain't going to happen. It just isn't. I mean, yeah, they convicted Trump up in New York on a crime before he was president, but people in New York hated Trump. So you could put him up for anything and they'd convict him. That's just how it works in New York City. But in Washington, D.C., just the opposite. They love their Democrats, and they're not going to convict any Democrat. They would convict Nixon, but they wouldn't convict anybody else. So there we are. We're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place, right? You think about it. What people have been convicted, notable treason cases, let's talk about some of those. There was Aaron Burr back in 1807. He wasn't really convicted, though. He was charged with treason. But there's a lot of political pressure going on here because he was trying to create an independent country in North America in the central part. Different country than America. That's what he was charged with. All right, that was back in 1807. And then a couple of ones more recent, so let's get into those. Tomoya Kawakita. You may not know who that is. That was the last person convicted of treason in 1952. Well, it turns out that Tomoya was a Japanese American who was charged with mistreating prisoners in World War II. Now, Tomoya was sentenced to death, but President Eisenhower commuted it to life imprisonment. Said, "Dan, don't do that." Well, ultimately, he was released and deported to Japan. All right, that goes back declared to 1952. One involving Julius and Ethel Rosenberg. They weren't convicted of treason. They were convicted of espionage, giving the atomic secrets to the Russians. Yes, and they were executed, but of espionage. There was another one you might want to hear about, was Adam Gadan. Now, this goes to 2006. He was doing propaganda for the Al-Qaeda and creating all that stuff. He never made it to trial because he was killed in a drone attack. So he never really got that far. Now, a couple of ones that caught my attention, you may not know, but I'll tell you about it anyway. There was Mildred Gillers. This was 1949. Mildred Gillers was known as Axis Sally. She was on the radio and talking to the American troops on the German side. So she was saying, hey, American broadcaster working with the Germans, saying, hey, Americans, you're losing. Okay? That was in Germany. She was sentenced to 10 to 30 years and given parole after 12 years. So that was in 1949. And then there was Eva de Quino. This is a classic one. She was Tokyo Rose. Tokyo Rose during World War II. For the Japanese, tell the Americans, you're losing. She was convicted of treason back in 1949. And she ended up serving 6 years in prison. Ultimately, in 1977, President Gerald Ford granted her a full pardon. And because they said she had been unjustly convicted, but those are the particular ones you should know about. I'm telling you all this because I do not believe, okay? I do not believe it is going to be possible to get a grand jury to either bring charges or, under the federal statutes at U.S. Code 18, statute of limitations is 5 years, folks. Therefore, I don't believe anybody is going to be charged or convicted of anything. It's all going to be a bad blotch on American history, but they're all going to get away with it. As much as you may dislike it, much as it may bother you, but the law is the law. And the statute of limitations says 5 years, and treason, not sure that one's going to work out. Maybe fraud, but I don't even think that'll work. Just so you understand, it ain't the best news I can tell you, but unfortunately, 18 USC says 5 years statute of limitations, and it's been 9 years. Folks, not the best news I can present, but I've got to be honest with you. And now you know what's going on. If you're one of those people trying to buy a house, you probably learned the hard way. Getting a house right now is not easy because the housing market is, pretty well frozen. And when you think about it, why shouldn't it be? Mortgage rates are currently hovering around almost 7%. Now, if you're someone who has a house and you could sell it, let's say you're a couple, your family's grown, you're an empty nester, you want to sell the house. Well, your house has gone up in value over the last few years, in some cases 50% what it was, say, 5-10 years ago. But you're sitting on a 2.5% mortgage. Now, if you want to get out of your house, go buy yourself something else, well, you're sitting at a 7% mortgage, roughly. Most people don't want to do that, and apparently most people aren't doing that. Now, you think about it, the average house cost in America, this is average in America, okay? Sea to shining sea. Average house cost is about $438,000 for the average home. $438,000. Not necessarily in my market, maybe in your market, somewhere across, maybe the East Coast, West Coast, I don't know. But the average income of the average American family is $75,000. Now, $75,000, they say you can only use about 25% of your income per any given month or any given year, 75,000, that could go toward a house. So you figure out, well, $75,000, 1/4 of that, well, 1/3 is 25, and 1/4, well, that's even less. And that's how much you can afford in a mortgage and a monthly payment, if you will. So $435,000 house, 30% mortgage or 30-year mortgage, 7%. It probably exceeds anything that you can get financed for. That's the problem that we have. Well, it turns out that a member of Congress, her name is Marjorie Taylor Greene. You've heard her referred to as MTG, they call her. She's a lady from Georgia, the 14th district in Georgia. She was elected from there. And she sits in Congress, and she's been kind of a firestorm for a lot of different things. She says some things and said some things, and believe me, it's irritated a lot of people, get her tossed out of committees. She's a firebrand. That's what they call them. Well, she's made an interesting proposal authoring, if you will, authoring a bill that would change the housing industry dramatically. And let me tell you what it is. What she is proposing, that if you sell your house, instead of facing a capital gains tax, which means that the money that you get from the house from what you owe on it and what it basically is worth. So if you have a house that, let's say you've got the mortgage done and you sell the house for, say, $1 million. Well, all right, $1 million, and you've got a house. Let's go with even $500,000. Okay, let's go cheaper money, $500,000. But you don't know anything on it. You've got a $500,000 capital gain. You're going to get taxed on that under the current tax rules. But if you reinvest it into a new place, then you don't get taxed on it. But you got to invest $500,000 into a new place. Maybe you don't want to place it that much money. So that's the problem with capital gains. You sell something, you got the money left over, money you reaped from your sale, and now you got to pay taxes on it. Well, Marjorie Taylor Greene has introduced this bill that says, you know what? There will no longer be a capital gains tax on your primary residence. Now, you may have a secondary residence, a tertiary residence, I don't care what you say, but your primary residence, you sell it, you don't get a capital gains tax. Would that make people thinking, Well, gee whiz, I can sell the house now and still get a higher mortgage, but I've got money to spend for a down payment, paying it off or whatever. That may work. I can't guarantee it will, but it's a very interesting idea in today's society because right now, everybody's finding out, gee, sell your house, make a whole lot of money. But then the government comes and wants a good portion of it for capital gains. So Marjorie Taylor Greene says, you know what? No more capital gains on the primary residence in which you live. Will that bill pass Congress? I don't know. My guess is, there are going to be people say, no, that takes away money from the Treasury. You can't do that. And we don't want that to do that because, well, whatever. But right now, what are you going to do to unlock the housing market? Interest rates aren't coming down as near as I could tell. If they're averaging 7%, someone with a 2.5-point mortgage, they're not going to sell their house. So you got a housing freeze. People can't get into a house because there's no houses available. And the ones they can get into, they can't afford. Between a rock and a hard place. So Marjorie Taylor Greene, member of Congress from Georgia, says eliminate the capital gains on your primary residence. Is it a good idea? Well, many think it is. Will it pass? Well, there's a lot of folks who say no, it won't. Either way, it was a trying to get something done and trying to make things happen. Let's see what happens down the road. It may pass, and I'm sure if it does, the president will sign it. Another thing going on in your Congress, and now you know. Well, the WNBA just finished another All-Star game. And this was an All-Star game that was, well, a little bit different. As you know, teams have All-Star games, whether it's basketball, football, baseball, whatever. They have their All-Star games. So the WNBA had theirs. Unfortunately, it ended with a score of 151 to 131. Collier versus Clark. And to be honest with you, that was something I didn't need to see. And I was all prepped, like most folks, to see a good, interesting game. Seeing the best players from each side duking it out, having a good time, seeing who could be the best and winning. This didn't turn out that way. The idea of creating what amounts to as a 4-point shot was an abomination, in my humble opinion. I mean, a 3-point shot, okay, the NBA has it, college has it, I understand that. But a 4-point shot, and then all the players decided, okay, let's just go out there and heave balls up and see where they go. There was no defense. Trust me. There was no defense in that game, just people running around, throwing the ball around, getting somebody in to take another 4-point shot. Players come 36 points a game. All right, that may happen on certain occasions, but, well, what we saw was ridiculous. Now, I guess the thing that probably was the most ridiculous to me as an average watcher, okay? Just keep this in mind. I mean, I got involved with the WNBA because, well, Caitlin Clark, let's be honest, most of us did. We wanted to see her. Well, she's been hurt again. She was sort of coaching from the sideline. But basically, when asked, what are you going to do? She said, throw up 4-point shots. That's all they were doing. It was kind of ridiculous when you think about it. But the bigger thing that stood out to me was all the ladies came out wearing those pay us what we want or what you owe us. Pay us what we want, you owe us. I looked at that and I said, wait a minute. Correct me if I'm wrong here, but I believe the WNBA has been in business for about 27 years. And I believe that every year the NBA hands out a check to each team totaling around $12 million, from what I've been told. And that money is divided up among the players to give them salaries, which are approximately $76,000 a year. All right. So for the last 27 years, the NBA has been putting up roughly $12 million. Well, that's a big chunk of money if you think about it over 27 years. $12 million? Well, 10 years is $120 million. So you figure that's over, $250 million plus? The NBA has been paying these women to play, and frankly, not sure about the playing. Well, so now they're saying our collective bargaining agreement ends in October, and they have been negotiating back and forth. And the league comes up and says, here's the deal we're offering you. The women say it's a slap in the face. Here's what we want. They want a share of the revenue. My question is simple. What revenue? The teams are losing $40 million a year. Now, if you're losing $40 million a year, where's the revenue? I mean, if you're saying you want part of the revenue, shouldn't you be paying part of the $40 million instead of getting money? That's the problem, folks. They're asking for the moon, and they're trying to get it based on one young lady, Caitlin Clark. She came into the league, excited everybody. People saw it. People wanted to come out and see it. If you remember what the WNBA was doing beforehand, was playing in high school gyms, playing in front of 3,000 to 4,000 people who really didn't care in the first place. No excitement, no nothing. Caitlin Clark shows up, and suddenly everybody wants to go see her. Young kids out there to get autographs. You've seen the pictures. Take a look at this. Everybody wants their autographs. Everybody wants to be there. Everyone's got the Caitlin Clark jersey. Jerseys were selling out. But she's getting beat up by these women because what? She's white, she's straight. Give me a break. So now they want money. And frankly, to tell you the truth, they're saying, well, if we don't get what we want, we are going to walk. Well, here's my take on this. If you don't get what you want, do not be surprised if the WNBA owners say, the heck with you guys, we're going to do a lockout. Yeah, going to do a lockout. See how you like it then. No 76 grand you're going to be picking up for that year. And frankly, is anybody going to be disturbed if the WNBA goes into a lockout? Some will, I assume, yes. But the majority are going to say, no, these women were trying to get something they don't have, revenue. So really, yes, I realize the ratings have gone up, but it's for one reason. Anytime Caitlin Clark ain't playing, the ratings drop 50% plus. Reason people show up in the facilities, they want to see Caitlin Clark play, so they got to move into larger facilities. She's your golden goose, and yet you're trying to kill her. You're trying to toss her out of the system because you don't like the fact she's there. She's white, she's straight, and she's playing in a league where virtually 3/4 of you were all black, and probably a majority of you are all hoping to be lesbians. I don't care. That's not the point. The point is you're trying to beat up your golden goose and kill the golden goose, and then trying to demand money up front that you haven't even earned because you're losing money. Let's be honest. Heck, even Larry Bird has come out and said, we may have to shut this thing down because you guys haven't figured out what you're doing and what you're not doing. And what you're not doing is you're not making the league profitable. And right now, one young lady is doing that. And what I understand, the owner of the Indianapolis Fever wants to erect a 12-foot bronze statue of Caitlin Clark in front of the Gainbridge Fieldhouse. 2 years playing, you get a bronze statue? I'm questioning that. Sorry, that's my opinion. All I can tell you right now is, you ladies out there, you want money, you want revenue sharing. There ain't no revenue. And frankly, what about all the money everybody's lost in the last 27 years? $40 million a year. That's almost $500 million. A lot of money, folks. And now you want to have more. Can't have your cake and eat it too. Nice try. And I'm not sure what's going to happen, but maybe Larry Bird was right. Maybe it's time to shut down the WNBA because you're not deserving of what you're getting and you just want more. It don't work out that way. And frankly, you're going to suffer.